Morning, everybody. Please forgive me. I hate microphones, so if I'm screaming, tell me to put it down, and I'll do my normal voice. But welcome. I'm glad that you guys are here to attend our session. It's always a challenge a little bit. The last session blocked for the last day of the conference, so thank you, and I hope everybody's doing well today. I almost feel like I'm lecturing again. Everybody's sitting in the back of the room, but this crowd's much more engaged already because you're already off your phones. Anyway, I wanted to go ahead and get started. I'm Paul Smith. I'm with the State Council of Higher Education for Virginia, and my long title that doesn't really describe what I do anymore is Senior Associate for Student Mobility Policy and Research. So that transfers into I work on the transfer policy within the state, anything that comes out of our General Assembly related to transfer, dual enrollment, credit for prior learning, AP, IB, CLEP, all of that stuff falls within my domain. And then occasionally, when I'm not doing all that, I actually get time to do research. Or we bring on a wonderful intern who helps with the research. But that's generally my role. And so as far as today goes, and I'll give more of a background as we move forward, and I'm going to let my colleague introduce herself in just a second. But we're really going to look at the pathway maps. So some of our legislation that came out in 2018, one of the key components of that was we developed pathway maps. And anybody who works with the General Assembly or policymakers or skeptical administrators within your colleges, between colleges, it's always nice to have numbers. And so as I was thinking about this, prior to bringing our intern on, I wanted to be able to quantify something. And so that kind of led to formulating a process. I did extensive research through the literature, looked in different areas. I could find nothing on how to quantify a pathway map. And it does seem intuitive that pathway maps will make the curriculum a lot better, but at the end of the day, do you have a baseline to measure that from? Yeah, you can go back and compare, but it provides a nice visual representation of how much you improved, what's the difference, and it also gives you a representation to go back and explore later on. So with that, I'm going to let my colleague introduce herself before we jump in.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bella Graber. I am an intern for the State Council of Higher Education for Virginia this year, and last summer I was a Transfer Virginia intern where I did some of the research you guys are about to see. I am currently a third year at the University of Virginia, and I'm studying political science and government, and this is my very first conference, so thank you all for being my very first audience.
All right, so we're going to jump in, and I don't know how many we seem to have represented Transfer Virginia quite well at this conference. I think we've had 4 presentations, so I hope the bar wasn't set so high that I don't meet that. But some of the slides, if you've attended my colleague's presentation, will look familiar, although we did add some more animation and change the color, so we weren't completely taking everything they had. So, but before we jump in, and I suspect it's probably pretty representative of most states out there, just wanted to talk about Virginia's transfer numbers a little bit. This is a slide that I used it last year, and we just got our new data released a couple weeks back, so but what I've seen, it looks pretty representative. But as you can see, about 61% of our transfers earn the associate degree, and roughly the other 40% transfer prior to the associate degree. So as part of that 2018 legislation that I'll talk about in just a bit more, and just a bit, we enacted some things to kind of help those other 40% as well, but not taking the focus off of those associate degree earners. As many in this room know, that earning that associate degree is also representative of completion and relatively quick transfer. At least that's been our what we've seen in Virginia. As far as our graduation rates, we have it broken down, and this is a slightly different cohort based on our tracking. We track students for cohorts out to about 10 years. But so this is still somewhat, the 2017, 2018 group. We're just starting to get some numbers for now. But, you can see here it's been relatively consistent across, since 2013, 2014. But we're seeing about 51, 55% of our students graduating, earning their baccalaureate degree. when they transfer with 15 or fewer credits, and it goes up from there. I think the only anomaly, and I have my suspicions on why it takes place, but are those students with 31 or more credits without the associate degree. And I think without the evidence in front of me, the reason we see better graduation rates with those students is because they're transferring prior to the associate degree, but have enough credit hours where they don't have to deal with that. You know, we always like to say 2+2, and one of my biggest pet peeves is one of the colleges in Richmond always advertise 2+2. I guess that sounds better than 2 plus 2.5 or 3, but those students leaving a little earlier are able to pick up those prerequisites and not have to extend their time to graduation, but that's my hypothesis on that. But generally, we push for the associate degree. That's what we want to see in our pathways. What we've done is make sure that that's a pretty clean alignment from the 2-year to the 4-year, and we've had pretty good success with that. But again, I work at the state level. I work with state policy. I speak to legislators. I have to give an update to our state council next month, and they want to see numbers. And because Transfer Virginia didn't really come about until 2018. We had some previous conversations starting in 2017, but we had a particular legislator that had her own ideas and ignored what Chev advised. So I can't say that all the legislation was bad. Some of it was a little quirky, but, and we have one of my colleagues from one of our community colleges knows what some of the growing pains were early on. So I like to look at this with the legislation and think about the origins of Transfer Virginia as a legislatively ignited opportunity. And that's a very polite way of saying we have to do it. But when we started down this path, we didn't want to just check the boxes for the legislation. And so a group of us, we have a standing state committee on transfer that meets several times a year. We wanted to do it right. And so we not only are satisfying our legislation, but bringing in best practices as well. Part of that legislation, a quick synopsis without putting everybody to sleep, we had, at least from my perspective, at the state level, we had to put together 4 policies, and Chev led that design. It was a collaborative process with all the institutions. We had one that dealt with standardizing how dual enrollment credit was transferred from the high school students, and worked on that because that's always a problem for us. Another one that establishes 2 programs that help those students that transfer prior to earning the associate degree. Another one that wanted us to set up better guidance on the formation of transfer agreements, and in Virginia we have, I'd say 3.5 is how I kind of describe it. 3 are legislatively required: guaranteed admission agreements, dual admission agreements, and articulation agreements. But we've kind of taken that to one additional step, especially with the pathway development, added guaranteed program admission agreements, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. Additionally, and then the last part, which is why we're here, we had to develop a process for putting together pathway maps. Our legislation said we had to do it for all programs. Wasn't practical. So we didn't tell them, but ultimately what we did is we chose 30 programs that we focused on the top transfer programs first, and then we were down into the ones that don't have as many transfer students at this point. But again, at the end of the day, we have 30 programs. We had roughly a 3-year. We had to put together a timeline. Per the legislation, we had a 3-year period to get these things in place. In Virginia, we are not a system. We do have a community college system, so that does help. But the problem was we had to get to that common learning outcomes and the common curriculum for the courses. That was never something we had. So Blue Ridge Community College would have these courses required to earn their associate degree, and they may align perfectly with their primary transfer partner, which is JMU, but they were not quite aligned with if the student wanted to go to George Mason or Old Dominion. So it was really, there was no way. I mean, we would have had 23 different transfer agreements or pathways for however many programs each one of these colleges had. So that common course and common curriculum that we had to establish for the community college system was critical. Otherwise, it just would have been too much. And lastly, I can't do this without plugging our state portal. We are very proud of this. And to summarize it pretty nicely, everything transfer goes here. So we have dual enrollment, we have course equivalents, we have a setup to where students can key in or upload their transcripts, look at the different colleges, compare how their credits will transfer, what their biggest benefits are, explore the different degree options. I'm sure I'm forgetting some stuff in there, but it's a wonderful, wonderful site. So I encourage, if you want to go visit, the URL is right there. So I've talked a little bit about what's under Transfer Virginia, but this is a nice representation. I mentioned the different credentials, particularly we know about the associate degree. Everybody has those. The other two were coming out of our legislation, the Passport and Uniform Certificate of General Studies. We had to establish these two programs. And they're very similar to other states' gen ed transfer blocks. They both have different credential requirements. The Passport is designed to be a one-semester, 16 credit hour block of courses that go to the institution, and the Uniform Certificate of General Studies is 30 to 32 credit hours that, again, transfers to the institution. These two smaller credentials have to be part of every pathway map we develop. So we already had the foundation, and I believe we have course rosters specific for both of those set up in multiple categories, and given the time, I can't go through. I'd like to, but I'm not going to go through that. But the big thing with these two is, unlike other gen ed packages that I've seen, the courses here have to satisfy graduation requirements. And so as they come in, we're not tossing, oh, this gen ed over here in this extra bucket. I don't want to say wasted credits, but I always refer to it as the extra bag that can satisfy that 120 if you get everything satisfied in 117 credits. But that was the big thing. And so we have this sequential pathway up to the associate degree. And so we were able to start there. I guess we have about, what did you say, Rajan? Probably 70 courses in the different categories, but they align pretty well with what the institutions need. As well as, and unlike my colleagues, we were able to get this to animate. And we made it in. But I mentioned the Common Curriculum, I mentioned the GPAAs, and I mentioned the GAAs. And so what the GAAs do is guarantee, they set up at a threshold requirement for transfer students. If you do this, you automatically gain admission to the institution, and this is what you get. No questions asked. The guaranteed program admission agreements are the same thing, but they would be specific to, say, going into mechanical engineering, for example. So just a little bit more specific. And where we have those, a lot of times the GAAs, there's always been a problem, again, with the transfer of credits. These don't outline the transfer of credits. So there's transfer guides that are listed there, which I like to refer to as pathways on steroids, because there's several components to those, one of them being the pathway and everything else. A lot of other information specific to the major or the transfer specifically, financial aid, employment outcomes, all of those are on that transfer guide, and then all of those transfer guides are on our portal. And then the Common Curriculum, as I talked about earlier. We've been able to better those guaranteed program admission agreements and the GAAs by being able to attach those transfer guides to this agreement between the institutions. And where before the agreements were between institution and institution, we've been able with the Common Curriculum now to make them with our system office. So James Madison will have an agreement with the system office. This is a guaranteed admission agreement. UVA, same thing. So we end up with roughly 14. We have 15 publics, but one of them is Virginia Military Institute, and they were exempted from the legislation. I like to say thankfully, because it would have been impossible to implement in that narrow scope of their curriculum. So this all ties in course revision and development. We have a legislative requirement to go through and review these pathways every 3 years, and that cycle, even though we're just now wrapping up, the initial round is going to have to start in about the next year. And then again, the plug for our portal. So Transfer Virginia, we started this back in 2018 with 4 goals. These, I think, are pretty standard goals, but the main thing was to improve efficiency, graduation rates, and get the students in and out. So we have our gateway barriers. We noticed that students that did not complete math and English in their first year were not completing. And if they were completing slowly. We wanted to get the mobility and timeliness up, and that involved reducing the number of students who completed the associate degree before transfer. We wanted to get that number up to make sure that they were getting that based on the data that we already have as a state. Degree attainment, and we're talking associate degree attainment here. Some students were taking 4 or 5 years to complete their associate degree, and these weren't part-time students. So what was the problem? This was an area we wanted to start getting students out within 2 years of starting their associate degree, 2 and 3 years. And then lastly, which I think is probably the most relevant to this conversation, is the credit efficiency. So how do we reduce the number of credits that are being lost or tossed into that extra bin in case you need them? I mean, we, as everybody's aware, transfer of credit versus the applicability of credit are 2 different things. And so that's what we were working on. And so developing the pathways, I will use pathways and transfer guides interchangeably. So like I said, the transfer guides includes the pathway. But this is where we ended up. And so as we're approaching, what are we at, about almost 4 years since we started, 5 years since we've kind of gotten the ball rolling with the legislation, we need some metrics. And so about the only one we can solidly identify as far as our initial goals and those metrics is the gateway courses. Everything else, since the pathways and the curriculum had to be developed, we're still several years out on that because we got to get the students in, get them out, get them to graduate. So we're a few years away, but we needed to show something, and we have to show some progress. We wanted to make sure we focused on the pathways themselves. This is just a snippet of one of our transfer guides. Like I said, it has a whole lot more information to it, but what we have is on your left, we have the VCCS Common Curriculum, and then on the right, the last 2 for the 4-year. And so once we got the Common Curriculum there, the 4 years went back and put their courses in here, and then these are the equivalents for the community college system. So we were able to align the 4 years curriculum, in this particular case at Virginia Commonwealth, in their accounting BS, with exactly which courses the student needed to take at the 2-year institution. So again, we're not accumulating those extra credits that are just transferring and not applying. So we were able to get that direct alignment. And I will add that all of our 14 public institutions that are required to be in Transfer Virginia, they do not have common curriculum. So the only system element is that community college system. And I will say we don't have common course numbering except at the community colleges. And I hope when next time they bring that up, it's time for me to retire, because that is a fight I am not taking on. But this is generally what they look like. This is what we consider and look for in our pathways. But again, how do we show somebody? We can give a policymaker that, and right now I think we have about 250 transfer guides on our Transfer Virginia portal, and with probably another 50 that are coming up. And so we got a pretty extensive amount, because when we identified the program areas, the institutions have the opportunity to say, do one for business administration, one for accounting, financial management. So some institutions have taken it. Our legislation only says they have to have one, but we give them the option to do more. But again, how do we quantify that? And so Ms. Graber over here did a wonderful job over the summer looking and pulling together data and reading through tons of dated college catalogs, and was cross-referencing what the community colleges had in 2020 and looking at what the 4 years required, just those 2 first years. And we examined early childhood, early education, elementary education, mechanical engineering, business administration, and computer science were the 4 disciplines we looked for. And that was because those were the 4 disciplines that complete their transfer guides earlier. And then we compared to what we have now with the common curriculum to what is in the college catalogs at the 4 years now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Graber and let her tell you how she did it.
Okay, so as Dr. Smith alluded to, we did have the problem of an information accessibility gap between the application of your credits towards one's degree. So we did identify three key questions that we wanted to study throughout our time doing research. So the first one was, what kind of model can we come up with to provide a metric? And then we wondered, how much can we improve? How much did we improve? And how aligned are our new transfer guides? So then with that, we created a study. So this is an example of our 2020, so our pre-transfer guides. So as you can see on this side, this is the Virginia Community College System guide for 2020, and this is the 4-year guide for 2020. They're both for business administration. So as you can see, the one on the left doesn't even separate by semester like the one on the right does, and when they do, there are lots of gaps. So if a student were to follow this one completely, it would not transfer directly to this one, and if it did, it wouldn't for other 4 years as well. So overall, they're just not equal. So then we created this study, and I'm going to go through sort of our methodology for how we created these numbers. So we denoted a 0 to a non-match on the 4-year side. So for this situation, this Foundations of Education course taken at the community college system actually does not transfer to this Foundations of Education course for the 4-year side. So we've denoted it a 0, as you can see on this side. So in this case, the student would have an excess credit of this Foundations of Education course that does not transfer to their degree graduation requirements. And they also would be a bit behind because they would have been expected to get this course in one of their first 4 semesters, but they didn't because these two do not transfer. So therefore, we denoted this one as 0. We've also given zeros to a non-match on the 2-year side. So what I mean by this is this course was required for the VCCS, Virginia Community College System, the College Success Skills class. Now this course either does not transfer to the 4-year side, or it was just not in the degree graduation requirements. So this would be an excess course that would not go towards their graduation requirements. Then we've got a 1 for a perfect match. So this Principles of Public Speaking course that the student took at the community college system aligns perfectly with the fundamental human communication course required at the 4-year. So in this case, they followed the transfer guides by taking this communications course that was in the transfer guides that the 4 years needed. So in a case like this, we would have given a 1. And then we've also given a 0.5 to sort of the gray area. So in this case, we've got a pre-calculus 1 class that was in the Virginia Community College transfer guide. And so we can assume in this case that the 4-year college required a calculus 1 course. So by the student taking this pre-calculus class, it was not wasted, it was not an excess credit because it was a requirement, a prerequisite for their required class. However, they are still a bit behind because it wasn't the exact lineup with the transfer guides. So we've given this one a 0.5 here. We've also given a 0.5 to transfer guides where it says you can take one of these 3 courses for it to line up perfectly. So then there is that little bit of room for error, so we gave it the 0.5 as well. And then this is our in total study design. So these are all of the numbers that I just told you about here. So in this case, the student took this college composition class in the Virginia Community College system that aligned perfectly with this English 1010 class. So this is Old Dominion University and Northern Virginia Community College here. And this is one of the rare cases where there was no 0.5 classes because it did have the pre-calculus 1 class in the course plan. So therefore the student took these classes and they aligned up to get 1s. And then we see here at the bottom we have that college success skills class that would be an extra credit, and the Intro to International Business class, which the student took at the community college and was not required and does not go towards degree requirements at the 4-year. So that would be given a 0 as well. And then we tallied these all up and went through every 4-year college and every 2-year community college to get these numbers. And these are the numbers that we found. So right here we have about a 48% average for the before. So again, we did business administration, computer science, elementary ed, and mechanical engineering. So these numbers are not very promising at all. So these were the before numbers, the pre-transfer, and then these were the after numbers. They look a lot better, it's far more efficient, and our change is very positive. So here we have it again as a visual for you all. So as you can see by the blue, the post-transfer Virginia implementation alignment is far more promising. And now that we have those numbers, we are able to display them in ways like this that show that the post-transfer was far better for the students. So we have our implications. So overall, we want the system that has the 94% average over the 45% average. This is far more efficient in transfer for money, for time, and to get to that degree as soon and as efficient as possible.
And just to kind of touch on the implications, I think we talked about this a little bit going through. The one thing I forgot to mention, this is not what we did as far as the numerical side of it, was not something new. Prior to this life, worked in pharmacology and toxicology, so I did some genetics work there, and so I was familiar from my undergrad with the concept looking at an identity matrix. Some of you guys, if you're in math or worked in the sciences, you probably know what that is. So basically, when you were looking at it in genetics, if both base pairs match up, that's a 1. If they don't match up, that's a 0. So again, thinking about how the transfer guides and the course-to-course equivalencies and applications were, that's where I, as we were designing this, ended up. Had to have a little wiggle room in there, so I modified it and added a 0.5. So that's how we ended up there. And then I will also add that as you could see, looking at the graph, it makes us look wonderful, so that we've done a great job. But the numbers there that Ms. Graber put up were state aggregates in those areas. We also have the disaggregated data, which was a lot of work for her, pulling together the pre. The post was a little easier when it came to looking at the community colleges. So again, we do have the disaggregated data by individual community colleges with the 4 years who actually have that transfer program. So that is all present. But again, I think the big thing is here is we have a metric. We can look back at that. We can visually identify the work that we've been doing since we don't have that transfer and graduation data just yet because the pathways are still new. This gives us something that we can put out that people can say, hey, great, this legislation, this process is working. And so that was something we wanted to make sure. And not to mention, there's a level of information transparency, not just for students, but families as a whole, institutional staff. They can say, hey, we go back, we take a look at this, or the student can say, I have this much aligned, I want to go to this institution. So this is good information, particularly from the transparency aspect. And as many of you in here are probably aware of, transparency is usually the biggest issue. Information dissemination is the biggest hindrance for students transferring. So with that, I thought about dropping the mic, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to transition to Augustus. So anybody have any questions? Yes.
I'm sorry if this is a repeat, but can you explain a little bit more about how you got started? How did you assign those 1s, 0s, 0.5s, like the actual physical work on your part as an intern? How did that get started? Like, you looked at pathways, or did you look at individual student behavior?
Oh, so we pulled the old college catalogs from 2020 for every 4-year and every 2-year, and then we put those next to each other, saw how they transferred. So for like an English 1010 class, if that transferred to the English 1010 class required by the 4-year, and then that, if the answer was yes, it was given a 1, and if the answer was no, it was given the 0 that we showed up there. So it was purely the transfer guide so that it could be replicated for each school. Did that answer your question? Yes. Okay.
We do now. Prior to the implementation of the legislation, we did not. We were able to track. We can track majors. It's within our state longitudinal data system, but it was a pretty complex algorithm to try to figure that out. It's not that it couldn't be done, it just wasn't as easy as it is now. So now we're required to track students by, not so much by the zip code that they're going to and from, but they have been tagged, and we have to compare them to native students in the same program. And so a couple years ago, actually it's 2017 now, which led to our legislation, our Joint Legislative Audit Commission, which is part of our General Assembly. It's their research wing. They did a study on the operations of the community college system and did some comparisons to the 4 years, looking at average credits to complete that degree. And so when the legislation came out, we need to now track that and compare them to natives, and also have to track it by the pathway map. So we did not have that prior, but we do have it now. Mhm.
So I guess I'm curious if you actually look at any student degree, student transcripts to kind of see if this is actually what's happening. Because those look like great numbers, but I'm noticing those students, that's
Yeah.
the question I have because I'm trying to figure out credit waste.
Right.
I look at it by student versus the pathway.
Right. And that makes sense. And the short answer to your question is at the state level, no. But that being said, that is also one of our limitations, given our time for 30 minutes. I didn't list the limitations, but again, we have to take what was on face value at the institutions, as well as what we can interpret from the older archives. And we bugged our colleagues like Rajan over here, I think a couple of times, to help us try to figure out a few things. But so that is one major limitation here. It would be nice to get down into the student records. At least from the state level, I don't know that we could do that, but it might be something we can explore with the institutions who are willing. Yes.
Are these transfer guides things that students just have the option of looking at to guide them as they go, or are they actually like signing up for a pathway that is linked to like a new student would be like almost like a contract
Mhm.
for a catalog year?
It is not a contract, so students still have, as the swirling aspect that we often see in the changing of majors. So as you're aware, they're only as good as none of this takes into human behavior or takes into account of human behavior. This is the perfect ideal situation. I know myself, I was a transfer student many moons ago. Took me a little bit to get where I was, and I was very fortunate that the University of Maryland was quite friendly. And so I was able to get through within about 2.5 years. But I know that hasn't always been the case. And, again, I think about it. I mean, it's always, and that's me working at the state policy level, it's often a struggle for us to explain the human behavior aspect to the folks writing the legislation, because they don't care. All they operate on are dollar signs. And it's just, to me, that's kind of the blunt way of putting it. And with that, again, ideally, I'll be interested to see what happens if the numbers aren't looking the same way that they would, the natives and the transfers, accumulation of credits are not very close. I'll be interested to see what happens there. But again, I'm about 5 years away from retirement, so. Mhm.
There's still the possibility that the 4 year could change their requirements, and that even if that
Oh,
student is on the pathway, then they would still be in line.
no. We actually accounted for that early on. Institutions, so in their guaranteed admission agreements and in this, we have put in policy that the students are entitled to the catalog year that they started under once they start following that pathway map, or if the current catalog year benefits them more. So there's that choice, and they would work on that with their advisors. Yes. Right. Yes.
Are these transfer maps digitized in a way where the students, when they go to register, it comes in their portal system that it shows them what classes they can take? And how often are these updated? Because I know there's a lot of curriculum changes that often happen. Does somebody go through it annually to make sure that what's there is still current with the curriculum?
Yes, to answer your first question, Rajan, how is it in EAB? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. How's it set up for the advising side?
We do not have our EAD or SIS program completed package. From a practical standpoint, if a student comes for advising and they say they want to go to JMU and be a business major, accounting focus, we can go to that portal, click on JMU advising pathway for accounting, and say at the moment we actually go into the high schools and JMU advisor representative comes with us. If they can tell us that, we can give them our day one when they're signing up for their first semester of courses. Here's your four-way path for your, you're going to take these exact classes at the community college and all this. But it's good, better, best. If they can't tell us, if they say, you know, I don't know, then we focus on maybe CGS classes because that's common. If they say, I want to be a psych major, but I don't know where I want to go, we can look at the psych common curriculum. If they can tell us all three, we can show them from moment one.
So they're kind
Do
of
not
paper,
deviate.
paper apps, so.
They're on the portal, they can access, we put the link, the digital link, so they can go, and then I think there's a 3 or 4 year date range at the top.
Yeah.
That says this pathway is good for this block of years, and then it'll be updated.
Yeah.
Also, on the transfer portal, there is a credit calculator that you could put all of your credits in, that can show you which pathway might be best for you. So that part is digitized, and then also on the portal, there's a transfer guide section with all of the schools, so you can kind of explore and see if you were to check off these boxes, which school works best for that.
So those who start undecided can say, how can I maximize my credit by throwing all their credit in a bucket and making a show for these
Yeah.
however many institutions. One thing that they did not say that I think is really important is when the publics, this is legislatively mandated, so the publics have to play the game. But we are very fortunate to have several private institutions that are very, they want our transfer students too, and they were invited to come to the
Yes.
table. So in addition to having the publics who are required to play, we have a whole bunch of rising, I want to stay in business.
Yeah.
Private schools that are doing the same thing to be in.
Yeah, so, yes, this was all, and thank you, Rajan. I don't mean to put you on the spot. You're just, I don't work in the weeds. I'm up here. So, but we are, and again, the community colleges, they have the option to go, or they can go to the portal, download the stuff, but that's not a state level system. That's a decision that the community colleges, the system office has to decide how that's going into their student information system. With that being said, we are looking to digitize the transfer guides a little better than it just being a PDF, but we had to get something started, and as with anything, we're working to evolve what is up there. You had a second question, I'm sorry.